We've got a lot to cover.
He's got more than that going.
A long-awaited meeting today to talk about our housing study and to welcome our partners at MRB Group. Thank you for joining us. It'd be great to start out with just a quick roundtable of introductions. I'll let our esteemed chair kick it off.
Ann Burr, been on the board for lots of years. This is a very exciting time and project for us.
Yeah.
It's a large undertaking that we haven't really done thoroughly over the years, so look forward to working with you.
Truman Tolfree, new member of the board, background in real estate and finance.
Steve Meyer, Hair Speech. We've met before. You guys have worked on some other stuff with some other IDA clients of ours.
I'm Rachel Barnello. I definitely know Tracy. Michael, I've seen you on video. And Ann, I think you're the only board member I didn't introduce Steve to. Steve is going to be covering for me while I'm out.
Oh, I
So we
that.
got him here to.
Congratulations. For us. That's great.
Yep.
I'm Robin Finnerty, staff at COMIDA. Allison Clark, staff at COMIDA.
I'm Michael Indolo. I'm the Director of Economic Development for MRB Group.
I'm Tracy Verrier. I'm the Deputy Director of Economic Development for MRB Group and a big IDA nerd.
I'm Howard Mafucci, the Monroe County Legislative Liaison, and I've already stolen your phrase, the test of reasonableness. Yes. I've added it to my list of the 10 Commandments of Effective Leadership. It's a great phrase.
Are there 11 commandments now?
Well, there's like 700.
No, there's like 100 of
There's like
them.
175,
Yeah.
but I call them the 10 Commandments because it's easy to connect.
My name's Rat King. I'm a board member.
Norman Jones, I'm a board member. I've spent many years working in local government.
And on a list, I know you guys well, Executive Director of COMIDA and also the Director of Planning and Development for the county. So wearing both of those hats here at the table today. We'll go ahead and get started. I understand that MRB Group has a presentation. You're going to give us kind of a high-level overview of what we're undertaking, and then we're going to have an open dialogue about what the members of our board wish to see through this process, and go from there.
Sounds good. Any other business to take care of before we jump in? Are we good to go?
This is the only item that we have on the agenda.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we were here last week.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have, just so that nobody goes away without knowing this, but at the end we have a little tutorial on your cost-benefit analysis tool. That was a request while we're all here gathered together to go over that. So, what are we here to do, right? Obviously you guys selected us as your housing study consultants. And our approach to this project is to basically say, okay, yes, there's a housing market data component of this, right? But what this is really about is what is the IDA's policy, right? What are you going to change in your policy, if anything, with respect to housing? And to get there, one of the things that we said in our proposal was we need to have a discussion at the very front of this to say, what are your goals? Before we can talk about policy, we have to know what your goals are, right? So we're going to open up a discussion in just a little bit about some thoughts about what your goals could be, and then to talk about what are some other things that we would need to know to inform this process. And that would be things like, what are the guardrails that we should put around those policies, right? And then what are the other attributes that you want to have in a potential housing project inducement in order for you to feel comfortable that this inducement is appropriate and real, right? And it's something that the IDA should be moving forward with. So, again, that big question to begin with is, what are your goals, right? And I'm going to ask you some sort of thought prompt questions about those to understand where you're at. And hopefully, if nothing else, we'll walk away from this meeting with a common understanding about this is the IDA's set of goals, this is the framework, and this is what's going to inform the rest of the process here, okay? So, I'm going to list them all out for you right now, and then we're going to take each one by one, okay? And that is, when we start off talking about housing, are we talking about affordable housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, luxury housing, all of those things, none of those things? You know, where are we gonna play? What space are we gonna play? Are we gonna talk about the entire county as a whole, or are we gonna think about this in terms of zones within the county, right? Areas within the county that we wanna focus on, right? Are we looking at big projects, medium, small projects? Are we looking for mixed income, or do we want a pure play, right? Do we want just, if we decide, for example, if we decide we're only interested in workforce housing, do you want workforce housing that's mixed income, right, across a variety of bands of income? And then a bigger question, which is, how big of an impact do you want on the market? Do you want to be a marginal player, which means to say you do few deals, but you know that you're the inducement, right? Or do you want a big impact, which means to say you're involved in a lot of deals and you know you've moved the market in the housing market, right? Do you want a one-size-fits-all policy, or do you want a flexible policy? When you talk about housing, and this is another sort of pure housing or not, right? We talked about mixed income housing, but what about mixed use? Is that part of your policy goal as well, right? You want to have housing plus, right? What are the other qualifiers in that housing question? And by that I mean, are you kind of big tent? Like we're willing to accept anything that comes along that meets one of these policy goals? Or are you gonna put qualifiers in there and say, at a minimum it has to be X, Y, and Z for us to be comfortable moving forward? But we talked earlier about, we were talking about the test of reasonableness. That's one possible qualifier. It's gotta pass the test of reasonableness. Right now you have another qualifier already in your policy, which is you have to have a certain number of units. If you're gonna do a market rate deal that's induced, you have to have a certain number of affordable units. That's a qualifier for a program. And then there's other ones that we can talk about. Tracy, by the way, is a former IDA director, has been through all these personally herself, but we deal with lots and lots of IDAs. Some IDAs have other criteria, like they want specifically, when they do a housing deal, they want the municipality to consent to the terms of the pilot, right? Obviously the municipality is consenting because they have land use control, right? But are they consenting to the terms of the pilot? That's another qualifier you can put in there. Okay, so that's the gambit of things for us to talk about when we talk about your goals for the housing space. Before I jump into any one item, I'm just gonna stop there and say, are there any questions? Is there anything we've missed so far, or anything you want to discuss before we go through these items? Because I just threw a lot of bullet points at you.
That's for sure.
I couldn't keep up. Hopefully, it's gonna be part of the package, right?
Yes, we're gonna have notes that come to, like, here's what was discussed, and here's what was decided, so.
I think you touched all the bases that we want, but we'd like to have it narrowed down to basically become the hybrid or the fix for what our needs are. And I think we've discussed what our needs are as part of your presentation when you presented to us a few weeks back.
Yep. Great. Anything else before we jump into these individual topics?
So I would say, as a overarching theme, at least for me, I think about this in really two different questions. The first is, we know that affordable housing is a need, not just in Monroe County, but across the country. And so, I think the first question that I'd like to try and address is, how do we incentivize affordable housing in Monroe County? Beyond that, we also know from a market rate perspective, I don't think we want to disincentivize market rate development, and I think this is where your test of reasonableness comes in. But to the extent that there are dynamics in the capital markets, right, that place constraints on the development of market rate housing, how do we provide incentives to help eliminate or at least ease the burden of those capital market constraints, to ease the path for market rate development in the county as well?
Spoken like a man in the finance world of real estate development. Yes, I like it.
So as somebody who represents the Monroe County Legislature,
Yeah.
what I'm looking for, and I'm not really a formal member of this group, so I'm looking for a way to expand the tax base, because the only way we are gonna address the services that we provide our residents is to expand the base, which means we have to be business friendly and we have to create jobs. If we do that, that's going to create housing issues. We don't even really know what some of them, we think we know what some of them are, but what we really need to know is, what are the real housing issues that we can address that expand the base, are business friendly, help create jobs, and should we incent them or not? Because if I incent everything using pilots, I'm not going to expand the base as big as I could. Because as soon as you provide a pilot, they're not paying the full assessed value of the property. So, I mean, I have a group of people, 29 people in the legislature, who love to spend money, even though they say they might not want to. And one of the easiest ways to do that, should there be legitimate reasons to spend money, is to make sure our base expands, so that we're not raising taxes that creates you're a tax raiser, so you get voted out of office. So I see this as part of, the message I have to bring back to the legislature is that COMIDA is doing housing, which they never did before, and they're doing it because it's a way to help expand our base, which will allow us to pay for the services people feel are essential, and we will learn how to provide appropriate abatements.
No, we have done housing.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
No, we have done housing.
Yeah.
But I think the key is that how do we get housing done right?
Right.
Because we really didn't have a policy that met the need of where we're at. It was just so, I don't say general, I don't wanna say vague, but it really, didn't give us a clear definition, like Truman said. We wanna be able to define what exactly the need is, and we need your organization to help us define that, and give us basically a blueprint, an outline on the direction, the steps that we take, because we are doing housing.
Our direction is going to be, which many of the members don't even know, because there's still a lot of members who don't understand, how do you pay for things without raising taxes?
Right.
So the issue is, expand your base, and there's pieces of that, one of which is housing issues, which do we really have a handle on what are our real housing needs in the city,
Right.
in the suburbs, to support our mission. Your mission is an economic mission.
Right.
Business friendly, job creation. That's the mission of COMIDA, correct?
Right.
So housing now has become this piece that's necessary to get the job done.
Right, what we have been doing housing, it's not like we haven't done housing.
Yeah, and again,
I just want to
because
make sure that we're clear on that.
Because I'm new to the group,
Yeah.
what I heard when I first joined was, there was debates about what's abatable and what's not. People were expressing concerns about, we're giving benefits to people who really don't need them, why are we doing that? What's our set aside gonna be? Is there a really need for a set aside?
Yeah, but we were doing
Right.
housing.
Right, but it was new, right?
No, we've been doing it for some time. So,
Okay,
Years.
okay. So, I mean, I was just new to the group, so
Okay,
sorry about
just-
that.
I
just wanna
think,
make sure it's clear.
amongst our group,
Yeah.
there was, some real questions about our policy and how do you interpret it? What kind of housing are we going to incent? It just was becoming an issue that was quite divisive for the board. And so that's when we said, hey, let's go get some more facts, see what we should be doing, and then make sure we can be successful with that.
So one clarification question. When I looked at the mission of COMIDA, before I joined your group, it looked like it was really focused on a business job creation model, and there was no real mention of housing.
That's changed.
So now that's changed, and now housing is part of it. So that's really what I was
It's
referring to.
technically now encapsulated within our mission statement. However, since, for many years throughout our history, we've done just housing projects, commercial, driven by private sector, commercial developers.
And what I'm hearing here is like, what, I don't wanna put words in your mouth, what I'm hearing here is like, first, do no harm, right? That's kind of one of the principles you're talking about, right?
Well, I'm not sure it would be do no harm, what it would be, because do no harm becomes something down the road. What to do is provide the missing pieces to expand your tax base by being business friendly and creating jobs. Because that, to me, that's the overarching umbrella. And now housing is a piece of that, because if we expand the base and we have more jobs, where are people gonna live?
Need the housing for the job.
That's really what I'm talking about, so.
Howard, if I may, I don't think what you're discussing and what Norman is talking about are incongruent. You know, I think they're aligned, and to the extent that we explore that question in the context of housing, again, I think the way that we do that and come up with a comprehensive answer is really to like bifurcate it into two separate issues. The first one is affordable housing. How do we incentivize affordable housing? Obviously, that still to some extent expands the base, but maybe more directly to your point, expanding the base and providing housing to the extent that jobs are needed. Then we're talking about really market rate development, market rate housing. Normally what would happen in a marketplace where there is sufficient demand for the development of market rate housing, developers would develop housing without any incentive to the extent that there was or there is economic feasibility. What constrains economic feasibility for market rate development, a couple of different things, most prominently really has to do with capital market conditions, right? So interest rates, cost of materials, cost of labor, those types of items reduce yield and return. And so to the extent that we are thinking about how do we incentivize market rate development in an environment where constraints don't incentivize it, what should our policy be? I think that's where we get back to talking about like the test of reasonableness and how much of an incentive we want to provide at the COMIDA level. If that makes sense.
Along with flexibility,
Yeah.
depending on the housing.
That benefits economic growth. For example, do we need to have more housing to support a program or a project like Fairlife? Or in Syracuse, like Micron? And how do we tie that into a policy to make sure that we articulate this is what we want to have happen? Because what could happen is that I can come in as just a developer and the word's out that COMIDA is giving out free money. And although I can make this project work on its own, if they're giving me free money, I'm coming to get it. And that's what we have to wrestle with a policy that basically identifies the ones that are going to be a stimulator or facilitator for economic development, for business or workforce, or that enhances the way we get these projects, off the board. Because Micron, they want housing in Syracuse. The Syracuse housing market right now is going through the roof. I know because I know people in Syracuse. I don't know if you got property over there. But you missed it. But it's really taken off. And there's certain parts of Syracuse where it was depressed and now it's going up. It's true.
Staff had a great opportunity to connect with Michael and Tracy recently, and we talked about, we had a 30,000 foot view of the scope of work here, and we did talk specifically about Greater Syracuse and Onondaga County, what trends are happening there, what strategic work have economic development organizations and workforce development organizations and the IDA, what have they been doing there that we could perhaps look towards as an example, as well as how might Micron perhaps have an echo effect in Monroe County as there's supply chain impacts that are driving economic development projects. I've heard murmurs that there are housing impacts, you know, in our neighboring counties. Perhaps there will be folks that are commuting from Monroe County to a job at Micron in Syracuse, you never know. So we're looking at Syracuse, we're looking at Erie County and Greater Buffalo. And I also thought it would be important for us to talk about outside of New York State borders, you know, looking at what great ideas are out there in larger cities and in second-tier cities elsewhere in the United States that we could emulate to the extent possible within the parameters of what IDAs can and can't do. But that's a great point, Norman, to bring up Micron and what's happening in Onondaga.
And the issues that you guys are grappling with, pretty much every IDA in the state is grappling with the same issues, so you're in good company, right? Everyone's asking themselves, do we have a role? What's our role? What's the appropriate role? And a lot of folks immediately go to what's the fair and appropriate role, right? Because we don't want to give an incentive to one developer that disadvantages somebody else. That's another common thing that we hear very, very often. We don't want to kind of push the market around and end up incentivizing deals but not really changing the total supply, right? So we just happen to favor those deals instead of those deals, right? Okay, well that doesn't really get us anywhere, right? So this is exactly the conversation we need to be having as a board, right? It's like, what is that right balance of action without distortion, right? Without making things happen that are not in our best interest, right?
And it should be, I'm gonna be a lot of wordy right now because I'm gonna leave in about 5 minutes, so you're gonna get all of me. Write it down. It shouldn't be just for right now. It should be a document that's gonna grow and live with us. So it's gonna be a living document that we can make, you know, changes to. It's gonna adapt to market conditions. Because, you know, right now, I sat through the meetings that we've had on other properties, and man, it was very painful. It was. And I heard there was a property, last week we approved a project in Greece, and it was unanimous. And it met that certain criteria. You guys did the economics on it, you did the underwriting, you did the analysis on it, and it meant everything that everybody needed to hear from it. And I know Lisa's on right now. I'm just surprised. You know, I'd like to hear what Lisa had to say, because that was the question that I asked. You know, how did Lisa feel about that project? Because she comes from a different perspective on this also. So it's interesting on how we build. I think as a board, we want to build consensus. We should bring something to the table, and it should make sense for the community. And it should not be a lot of just, you know, back and forth and contention around a topic. We should say, guess what? It meets this, and this is our criteria, and we should have some discussions, and then we try to build consensus. We're not always going to agree, but where we're at before, we didn't have a good blueprint or outline to follow to make it work for us. Right, Brett?
Yeah. Michael, to add to what everybody's saying, I think that when the governance committee got together and took a look at housing, for instance, there was really nothing there for affordable housing, a set aside, and we felt that that was important. So the first step that happened, I think 2 years ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, there was no set aside. Then all of a sudden, there was a 10% set aside, and just in the last year or maybe a little less, now there's a 20% set aside. That's actually why we're at this table. That's why, that's where it all started. That's only a minute piece, but that was
Well,
our.
and it started, I think even, and I'm sorry to interject, there was a process that led to that change in 2021. There was the 10% set aside that we introduced in 21. The 20%, we expanded it to 20% in the summer of 2024. And leading up to 2021, I understand there was some consternation about housing projects and the fact that we had no restrictions on relative to affordability on our books.
And to be totally honest and clear, I sat at the governance committee meeting and I said, what we're doing by throwing these numbers up in the air without having any type of data behind it, it's foolhardy, it doesn't make any sense, we need a study. Did I not say that?
You did.
Did I not say that?
You didn't, you were witness to.
Okay, I'm just.
We are your
so-
witness.
I don't recall.
Anna, can I say something?
Well,
Oh, yes,
I listened to what Norm and Rhett said, and I think, you know, one of the issues that I had is we were so diligently working towards looking at affordable housing, looking at housing for people that just couldn't afford housing, and then we seemed to kind of hit into the luxury market. So I think that's where my my problem started to come into play, was how we went from trying to provide housing for people that really couldn't afford it, and then to start supporting apartments that I definitely consider luxury. So just to answer Norm's question, and Rhett kind of went in and kind of said that we were diligently working towards that, and then we kind of backstepped. So, I mean, we talked about this last time. I'm a realtor. I see people all the time that can't afford to buy houses. And it's just something that, you know, really plays on my heart. So my big thing is, how do we help the people that are really working hard to help themselves but just can't help themselves? So I think that's kind of where my stance is on it.
Well, it's a perfect segue, because one of the things I want to ask is, in the affordable housing question, right? Now, we were discussing it as a set-aside option, right? That's a condition, but that's one of those qualifications we talked about earlier. You could say, we want these qualifications, right? If you want to do a housing project, you got to have a set-aside. But does the IDA see a role for itself with respect to just pure affordable housing, right? Is that something that the IDA wants to be involved with?
I think you have mechanisms in place for affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to make sure that you're not stepping into someone else's backyard. I mean, you have the Rochester Housing Authority that does that. They have all types of funds associated. Then there's other programs that are out there, the home leasings, they're doing that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So do we need to do that? I think that there should be a tie-in in regards to workforce and projects that enhances the ability for us to bring in, you know, a Micron, a Fairlife, Brett's next new initiative that he's gonna bring in, right? You're working on a big project, right?
Amazon.
Amazon.
Before that.
Yeah, so I think somehow we have to work on it. Now, that's gonna be your task to help us divine that, so we're not gonna come up with the answer. You guys are gonna come up with that.
Well, to be fair though, we're going to bring the data to bear on the policy items that you're interested in, right? And if you come back and say, for example, let's just say the IDA says, our policy is going to be, we're going to support housing units that are connected to the workforce, right? Well, then Tracy and I are not going to look at the senior housing market, right? Because you're not interested in doing senior housing. They're not part of the workforce, right? So we'd have to, that's part of the question, that's part of why we're asking these things, right?
So is it part of the workforce?
Generally speaking, not, right? That's outside of the age that we would consider being part of the workforce, right?
Truman, what do you think? I mean, should it be part of the, senior?
I mean, I guess I'll broaden the scope of the conversation beyond senior. Like the threshold question for me is, should we be involved with affordable housing? And to the extent that the answer to that question is yes, then I think the next logical response should be, or would be, yes, we also need to be part of the toolkit that developers have to, make affordable housing development feasible, right? I mean, if you look across the country, developers who do affordable housing development have a lot of different tools at their disposal. One of the most prominent tools that they have typically is some kind of a real estate tax abatement, right? They have pilot agreements, they have tax increment financing agreements. I mean, they're called different things across the country, but these types of economic incentives make economic development, typically in markets that have historically experienced disinvestment and blight, feasible. And so, again, to the extent that we believe we should be involved in affordable housing, I think the answer to the question is yes, we should provide pilots. To specifically answer the question that Lisa posed and that you broached as well, how do we make sure we have railroads in place or safeguards in place to make sure that we are not enriching, market rate developers? From that standpoint, I think that, it's a slippery slope, but there are ways to do that. And, we had conversations about that. You can say, well, 20%, if you have a pilot agreement, there's a 20% set aside, right? You have to have 20% affordable. That meets the first objective of creating affordable housing in the market. But again, if you think about what makes market rate development feasible, no developer in his or her right mind would willingly set aside 20% of units if the project were feasible on its own without needing support of COMIDA, right? The only reason you do that is because the project doesn't necessarily pencil. And the reason why it doesn't pencil, again, are because of a couple of different reasons. Number one, capital market conditions. Interest rates are high. And so, we've talked about this, and I want to, I'm getting long-winded now, and so I don't want to take over the conversation. But, if you take a look at the way real estate construction loans or permanent loans are underwritten, there are a couple of different constraints that they have in place. They're constrained by loan to value, they're constrained by debt service coverage ratio, right? Over the last 12 to 24 months, we've been in an environment where developers have been constrained not by loan to value, but we're constrained by debt service coverage ratio. And so whereas historically we were able to get loans that were at 80% of cost or 80% of value, that's been significantly reduced. That now has gone down to 50%, 60%, 65%.
So what do you find the difference?
And that's exactly right. And so for every dollar that you lose in leverage, you have to make up for it in either equity or some kind of incentive, right? Some kind of subsidy. And not only that, if you make up 100% of that erosion in debt with equity, then what that does, this is the way math works, it dilutes your yield on equity, right? So for every additional dollar that you put in, to the extent that your bottom line doesn't increase, your net operating income is going to remain the same. Free cash flow to equity is going to remain the same. Your yield is diluted. And so you have to figure out a way to replace in the capital stack that additional equity that you would have to put in place with subsidy that makes your yield the same. And so again, that's with programs like COMIDA, right? Pilot agreements, TIF agreements, historic tax credits. There are a lot of different things that are at play, but I think there's a way that we can do this and be responsible and not enrich the market rate developers by saying, you need some help. Maybe you don't want to have affordable housing, and a pilot will be helpful, pay us a fee, right? Pay a fee, and, that would allow you to waive the set aside, but at least you're paying a fee. You still get the subsidy, and they would do that cost benefit analysis. They would say, okay, it makes sense for us to pay this fee. We get the pilot agreement. It's not 100% of the pilot because we still have to pay something for it, and you're still incentivizing market rate development and not over-enriching those developers.
I can hear you talk all day long. Thank you. But I have to run. I feel great about where we're at right now. Much better than where we were a few years back. And
I thought you were talking about walking out the door.
No, I like you guys. I like being around you, especially you. No, thanks everybody. I think.
Exit 24 on 490.
Thank you. All right, see you.
Just to add to the affordable housing discussion, I think we're hearing that, yes, the board does want to be involved in the affordable housing space. The issue that we're seeing, and IDAs across the state are seeing, is the use of the Housing Development Fund corporations and the as-of-right benefits that they can avail themselves of, pilot, sales, and mortgage tax, without inclusion of the IDA at all. It puts a burden on the municipality because they have to administer those pilots directly. The IDA is taken out of the equation, and the downside to that is we don't receive our administrative fee, which this board does tremendous things with those administrative fees. So is there a way for this IDA to position itself, and this is a question for the board really, is there a way for this IDA to position itself through its policy and what it's offering to affordable housing to make it the logical choice for affordable housing developers, so they don't go the HDFC route, they come back to the IDA? Or is our energy best served in saying, okay, fine, the market has benefits available to those types of projects.
Yeah.
Let's focus our energy on workforce housing that supports the project. So I think it's, yes, we want to be involved, but is that the best use of our energy when as of right benefits undercut IDA benefits?
And I would even say further, like political capital, right?
Right.
Because they suddenly now we're getting flack from different people that say, well, look, if there, I mean, some IDAs basically say you must exhaust every other public program before you come to the IDA, right? That's their essential. Whether or not it's written that way, it's their effective way that they administer the IDA, right? And so don't ask us for a sales tax exemption if you can get one through the HFA, right? We don't need to give it to you. We don't need to take the political heat for that. You just get it through the agency, right? One of the things I would say, and actually it goes, by the way, I feel like we owe you a consulting fee, is one of the things that also balances, because there is math to this, right? Is to say, look, let's say our incentive is 20, or I'm sorry, our qualifier is 20% affordable units. That's our set aside requirement, right?
Currently.
And then we say, well, actually, we'd love that to be 50% set aside, right? I'm just being salacious, right? Right? Well, now the IDA is going to have to give a huge tax abatement to make that project pencil, right? There is a tension there too, right? To say the higher the qualification, the higher the incentive package that we need to make the deal happen, right? I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that dynamic, right? So, if we move forward with something where we say every deal must have these qualifications, the board should understand that will then require a deeper incentive package, right? And there's political trade-off for that as well.
Deliver what? A deep incentive? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Just repeat the
I said,
last phrase.
The more qualifiers you put on a deal, right? The deeper the incentive package, mathematically, needs to be to make that same deal happen, right? So for example, I'm just gonna give this simple example, right? Some IDAs require union labor on every deal, right? Okay? They are gonna have to offer a deeper abatement than a deal that doesn't require union labor because the cost structure for the developer is hard, right? So there are trade-offs. We have to think about those trade-offs. But that goes back into like, are we involved in affordable housing? That's one way to be involved. The implication is we have to change our abatement schedules to make that happen.
Right. So to just amplify that example, if the shelter rent pilot that the HDFC can get directly from the municipality is 10% shelter rent, which is 10% of revenues less utilities and some other things, does the IDA say, we really want to be in that space, we're going to offer a 5% shelter rent, so we're taking less of the revenue off, so we really want to get into that space, and so we're going to do it by offering a more generous shelter rent pilot? Or is that not worth the political capital? Because maybe the town likes administering the pilot all on their own.
It gets very complicated for the assessor.
It does.
Very complicated for
It
the
does.
assessor.
It's a lot of work for the towns. And I don't think we've asked, I know we haven't asked them, do you want to do this?
Right.
And this is just, Michael started by listing all the types of housing we could be involved in. These are all the considerations, I won't say complications, all the considerations just in the affordable housing category.
I just have a quick question of clarification to explain to my colleagues when I do this at some point. Affordable housing is part of the mission of COMIDA.
Housing is part of the mission of COMIDA.
But it's affordable housing,
It's
or just housing in general?
Housing
housing in general.
writ large.
Okay. And then, for me, connecting it to job creation would be a way to rationalize it, but housing now is part of the mission.
Yes, as
Okay.
of this past summer, in tandem with updating the policy, the housing incentives policy, we included housing in COMIDA's formal mission statement.
Okay, so part of the complaints at the ledge, which could be, again, not understanding everything, was that you're just giving money away to developers that don't need it. But that's really not happening, so.
Well, we hope not.
I
We
think
don't
that's,
ever think so.
We
Well, I
walk
don't
away,
know, but-
we walk away from projects.
that's a
You know, again,
commonly held misunderstanding
I
that
can,
relates to all.
I can think of one project where it got kind of involved in that.
They think we pull up with the Brinks truck
Right.
and like
Right.
unload the stacks of cash.
You know, I actually, the quote I heard several times from people is that it's essentially all you're doing is enriching developers. But that's not the case.
That's a misunderstanding, I think, and every project is different.
Right. Well, you know, I hear a lot of things at my meetings.
I'm sure you do.
So, and this brings up, we go back to the test of reasonableness, right? I know what you like the phrase. Housing is very different in some respects than other IDA deals. And the way I explain it is this. When you're trying to attract that manufacturer, right? You're competing globally, right? You're basically saying, we need to be competitive as a community to get that group here in our community, right? Housing is very different. Housing, the question is, what is the minimum abatement we need to give in order to induce the deal? But first of all, does the housing project need an abatement, number one? And number two, what's the minimum amount? You're not competing with South Carolina on your housing projects, right? You're competing with dollars and cents and developer performance. That's essentially what you're doing. So you have to think about it in a little bit different than that. Because that's the giveaway. We always hear the giveaway. I mean, we've heard about it since the beginning of time in IDAs. In that context is you're giving it away to big businesses, right? You're giving it away to corporations that, you know, are, who knows, name your country, right? In this case, it's really a question of whether or not the deal can be done. And people need to reframe it in that. I will also say, for the benefit of the legislature, to say, this question about whether or not housing is part of the IDA mission, I feel is a resolved matter at this point. Because the controller has been poking at it, and the ABO has been poking at it, and they have stopped poking at it. For all intents and purposes, they've stopped poking at it, right? As long as you have, as long as your mission statement includes housing, as long as you're consistent and you have a UTEP that doesn't require you to deviate on every single project that you do, right? They're comfortable with, okay, housing can be part of an IDA mission, right? I would also say, Tracy and I do a tremendous amount of housing analysis, as you can imagine. And we do whole countywide studies. We get, like, people tell us, hey, what do we need to do? One of the things that we've found pretty universally is that you have supply constraints all along the spectrum, right? Affordable, workforce, market rate. Maybe we'll set aside luxury, okay? We're not gonna say there's a,
No, that's not gonna happen, right?
but,
Senior housing.
senior housing,
Senior,
yep,
sure.
exactly, right? Special needs housing, everything like that. One way to think about it is the supply and demand applies to that entire continuum, right? So some IDAs look at it and say, when we add housing units on the affordable side, we're decreasing the demand pressure on all of the other things upstream from that, right? Because now we've added extra units, and vice versa. By adding market rate units, we're reducing the demand pressure on those affordable units, right? And communities are struggling with housing right now across the board. And so I feel as if communities in general and IDAs in particular are thinking about much more broadly that if we're gonna have a workforce, we actually need to solve along all of those points of the spectrum. Otherwise, we're just pushing the problem to a different part of the spectrum, right? Does that make sense? I hope. Okay. All right, so where did we leave affordable housing then? Is the, you know, and we're not gonna answer this today, but obviously we wanna start with some direction, right? Is the IDA only comfortable talking about affordable housing in the context of a set-aside? Or is the IDA interested in looking at affordable housing as a standalone product, right? And Rachel brought up the question of like, okay, well, we don't wanna do deals that could be done a different way, right? Like, we don't have to be involved in the deals that the HFA can do. We can also organize our UTEP so that we're only incentivizing deals that would be outside of the HFA process, right? Where we need like 5% shelter rent instead of a 10% that they would do, right? Thoughts about that? Because I think I feel in this discussion, I've heard both sides. We want to do it, we don't want to do it, right?
So some examples of 100% affordable housing that we have done are Andrews Terrace,
Towers.
Keeler,
Right.
and Cedarwood Tower. Before that, there were a number of them, but Anne, you would have been on the board. And what we saw a lot was, like there's the housing development near Costco on Westfall. That one is one of our IDA pilots, but the Rochester Housing Authority issued. So just some examples of, so you know what Michael means by 100% affordable product. Those are some examples.
Those were effective projects.
Great projects.
And it was heartwarming, you know, to go out and see the changes to those buildings for people on limited incomes. That they actually had, you know, space for a washing machine and dignity. It was really sort of heartwarming, but true to, I think, our mission, which is let's, you know, have affordable housing out there. And how do we get there?
Oh, and more recently, 733 Portland Avenue. Do you remember Patricia Cruz Irving came in? That's a great project, smaller. But so I think the board has seen a number of those projects and has wanted to be involved in the 100% affordable.
How do the home leasing ones fit in?
Home leasing, of course, all the home leasing, geez. Yeah.
So with these policy questions, you know, I tend to believe that the guidepost really should be our mission. And if we have decided on what our mission is, then that should be our compass. And if our mission is to provide housing, then that's what we should do, right? I don't know why. Right, I mean, I feel like we're going back and forth and we're struggling with what the mission of COMIDA is. And, you know, I think we've had this conversation. And so I would, I want to put you on the spot, Anna, but I would ask you, like, what do you think the mission of the agency actually is? Is the mission to relegate support just for affordable housing, or is the mission to incentivize housing in Monroe County? Because I think that is what we should look to, right, to help us come to terms with what the answer for the policy should be.
I think the way that our mission statement is currently written covers exactly what our mission is and should be. And it very generally says housing. It includes housing along with economic prosperity. I don't have it written on a piece of paper in front of me, and I don't want to bore you by reading out from it, but I would posit that by including housing alongside increasing access to jobs and economic prosperity and incentivizing capital investments, furthering capital investments in Monroe County, that we should aim to help support housing development at most, not all income levels, but you know, all the way up to not inclusive of luxury, given the current economic situation. And we should use all of the tools that we have in our toolbox to test, you know, the tension, look at the pro formas, make sure in some cases that a developer is exhausting all other avenues to obtain public support for their projects or outside support for their projects before they come to the IDA, unless the project is 100% or a great deal affordable.
Sure.
That's my opinion, and I don't have the same level of expertise that you do when it comes to financing these types of deals. I believe that, especially in light of what's been happening, and we spoke, Robin and I spoke with the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors late last week. We understand that this problem with the inventory has been percolating since the early 2000s. We're certainly not alone. All throughout New York State, there's a dearth of housing, and it's housing for the average worker, folks that are earning a healthy income, teachers, public servants, people that have good jobs and education and are giving back to our community cannot enter the housing market. So I believe that the IDA should be playing a role, whatever is appropriate in the auspices of state law and our bylaws, playing a role in increasing the inventory. Understanding too that there's a local municipal important role to be played with planning and zoning and approvals and things of that nature.
And I plan on explaining it to my colleagues as the mission of COMIDA essentially is job creation and being business friendly. And we know we have a housing problem anyway. You can't have job creation and be business friendly without housing. People gotta live somewhere. So of course it's part of COMIDA.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They go
You know,
hand in hand.
I like it. It makes sense to me. And so, you know, we can get into the weeds with this, but I think sometimes the most simple policy is probably the most elegant. And, you know, saying that we are going to provide support for housing developments to the extent that you receive a public benefit, there has to be a public good, right? That in exchange for this benefit, there's an affordable housing set aside. We need to determine what the set aside, the appropriate set aside should be. But one of the ways that we can get to, you know, Anna's point about workforce housing and make sure it's affordable for workforce housing and just not very low income individuals, you know, we can start having conversations about AMI limitations, right? So maybe it's not 50% or below of AMI, maybe it's 60% up to 80%, right? You can play around with the AMI limitations and affordability to make sure that you're actually inducing and providing workforce housing as opposed to just very low income or, you know, very high income. But, you know, to the extent that there's that set aside with additional constraints layered on top with AMI, and then again, if you want to also induce and not restrict just pure market rate development, if market rate developers understand that that's the policy, right? If that's a policy that we put out there, Truman Tollfree wants to develop a project, right? And I want a pilot from COMIDA. I understand I have to have a 20% affordable set aside, right? There's no question. There's no waiving of that policy without me having to give something back to COMIDA, right? So if we understand that there's a fee that developers have to pay to waive that policy, then that I think helps to govern, right, the question that people have about, are we just enriching market rate developers? You know, the answer to that question at that point is no, right? We're not. And there are cases that we can point to across the country where you can tell that that's actually the case. You know, again, the example that I always use is Chicago because that's where I'm from, right? The policy in Chicago for their tax increment financing program is if you come to the city and you want a TIF, which is for all intents and purposes the equivalent of a pilot, there's a 20% affordable housing mandate. To the extent that you don't want to provide affordable housing, that 20% mandate, you want to be exempt from that requirement, you have to pay $200,000 per door. It's flat fee, right? Now, I think that is probably a little too archaic, right, and, you know, punitive. I think there's a better way to do that. I think that you can, as opposed to having a nominal and flat fee attached with the waiver, it should be some kind of percentage that's attached to what the nominal amount of that inducement we're going to be. So what do I mean by that? You could be in a situation in Chicago where the value of the pilot is less than you paying $200,000 per door, right? So let's say you have 10 units, right, $200,000, you're paying $2 million, but the value of the pilot may only be $1.5 million. I don't know, I'm making these numbers up, right? You're not actually still at that point inducing market rate development. But let's say that, well, As opposed to that, we're going to put a percentage on that, right? Let's say you have to pay us 50% of what the inducement would have been worth. So the pilot is worth 1.5 million. Instead of you paying $200,000 per door, you pay us 50% of the 1.5, that's $750,000, right? So now you're netting $750,000 and not 1.5. That $750,000 goes back to COMIDA. COMIDA can use that money to, do good work in the community and in the county, right? Which is what we do with the fees which is what we generate. So I think there's a way that, we can address all of these just by getting a little bit creative with the AMI limitations, the affordability requirements, and like the fee that we charge developers if they want to waive the set aside.
To dovetail on that point too about the doing good work in the community, one thing we haven't addressed in the context of this meeting yet is the recent establishment of the Monroe County Land Bank Corporation, which I think it's the 39th land bank in the state of New York, recently blessed by Housing Community Renewal, still in its nascent phases of getting up on its feet. The county's funneling $1 million of ARPA funds into it, but you are experts on these types of structures, and land banks can circumvent, they can sort of get involved and purchase properties, take properties before they go up for auction. And what we've been seeing in Monroe County is once properties do ultimately go up for auction, they get snapped up by LLCs and by house flippers, and it's disruptive to first-time home buyers. So perhaps there's a way for us to connect the fee piece of this discussion to the land bank, such that the land bank can acquire more and more developable properties and get them ready for sale to first-time income-eligible homeowners. That's one idea or suggestion, and that's housed here within the Department of Planning and Development. So there's a good, we're all part of the same family with COMIDA.
And part of our scope of work is we're going to look at other IDAs that are similar to yours and say, hey, these are some innovative things that people are doing elsewhere. In particular, Albany County Land Bank is super, super, super active, right? We've been involved with them quite a bit, and they've done some interesting deals.
That's great.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. We're going to need to spend some time on the cost benefit, but I have one question I do want to throw out there from this list that is, I know, not going to be easy to answer, right? But we do need to read from you guys, and that is, how impactful do you want to be as an IDA, right? And there's that kind of like, we would prefer to do fewer deals and make the abatement thinner, right? Or we're willing to do more, we want to have a big impact, we want to do more deals, and we recognize it's going to require a deeper abatement, right? Where does the IDA, from just a general sense, feel? Like, do you want a marginal role or an active role? That's the question. And I know there's no black and white answer to that, but just give us your thoughts.
And be clear, neither is bad.
That's right, yeah.
The word marginal makes it seem like it's not good, but that's not the case.
I would say solve the housing problem. What's the problem? Solve it.
Which would probably be a volume base. We'd be doing more deals, I would think.
Well, there are tremendous housing issues out there right now that are daunting. I mean, people trying to find a house where I live is like impossible. Impossible. Just can't do it. Not enough for sale. Not enough being built. Is what it is.
Well, just to be clear, the IDA, I know it's been different in the past, but the IDA is probably going to stick closer to the for rent market, right? As opposed to for sale market. Right. But, yes, I guess I understand that. But it does impact the for sale market because you're adding volume, right? You're adding volume. But I just want to make sure if you talk to your legislative colleagues, we're going in the for rent.
What's happening where I live is this. There are 2 apartment complexes that are now going to be built, thankfully, and that will free up housing for people who want it. I don't call it age in place anymore. It's downsizing place, which you guys invented, which is a great phrase, because it's people who, they don't need a lot of support because they're active adults like me, but they don't want to own a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial anymore. So they'll rent an apartment, and that frees up those houses that now can be bought by other people, first-time homeowners, that kind of thing. That's working, actually, once they're built. We have one that already sold out. They didn't get any of it. Dunwood Green is completely
That's
sold
great.
out.
Wow.
370 apartments, done.
That's over by
That's right by
Locust Hill,
across
yeah.
from me at Locust Hill Country Club, yeah. It's amazing, actually. I didn't realize how quickly it would sell, because they're not cheap.
So I'm hearing one person saying, let's take a very active role, right, or let's take an active role, let's call it. Is that the board consensus, that we wanna be, you know, active in that space?
But I don't know if I'm clear on what active actually means. Are you talking about the level of support that we provide?
What I mean is this, are you, in that continuum between, we wanna do, we only wanna be involved in a select number of deals where we are giving relatively small abatements.
Mm-hmm.
And the other extreme is, we're willing to do big abatements because we wanna have a big impact, right, okay? So this I'm calling the marginal, I don't know what you would call it, right, and this is like the real active.
Oh, sure.
So where on that continuum does the IDA wanna be?
Oh, yeah.
Closer to the active, closer to the marginal, smack in the middle, what do you wanna be?
You know, I don't think we should have solved a problem, right? You know, I think that if we're going to do it, we should be active, right? We should come to the table with a solution.
Okay.
That's my opinion, but I'm sorry.
Other board
Creates additional
members?
work for you all, but.
With our chair thing.
What is it? I think we absolutely have to be involved in housing. And I don't know if we're in the position where we can dive into market rate when we need to, if it's a bigger opportunity for the county, whatever, or if it's senior housing or, you know, the affordable housing. I don't think we should leave anything on the table. If there's something really terrific out there that's gonna help Monroe County, and we can use incentives, that's what we do. You know, I would think we would still want to be a player in that, not just commercial and not just affordable. There's somewhere in between that their needs are out there as well. So, but we don't do luxury housing. Some have tried, but we don't do that. But, so it needs to meet the economic needs, I think, of the community.
Okay.
Brett, what about you? What's your opinion?
I would agree. I would agree. I think we're all here because we're trying to figure out what's best for the community. Not just the projects, but the folks that live here. Truman talked about over-incentivizing. You know, it's on the backs of people that live in the community. So I think it's a bold, what we're trying to do is awful bold. And I think the more pieces to it that we can put together, obviously there'll be changes going on, but we need something to start with that covers the whole housing market.
Great, okay.
Lisa, can I put you in the hot seat to opine on this question that Michael posed to the board about whether we should be more or less active in the housing space? She's on mute. Lisa, can you hear me? I think you're still on mute.
I think the room is generally hard, like, to
Oh,
hear.
okay.
She might not be able to hear us well.
Okay.
There she is.
I cannot, I don't know if your speaker's not working, but I had a really tough time. I couldn't hear a word that Ann said and I can't hear you. Can you repeat what the question was?
Yes, Lisa, can you hear me okay now?
I've got you, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
It's
So
like the
Michael-
speaker keeps cutting out, so.
Oh, apologies, okay. Michael and Dolo posed an important question to the whole board, kind of a question that cuts at the heart of this whole exercise, which is, do we want, and I shouldn't speak for Michael, but do we want to be more active or less active across the spectrum in incentivizing housing projects. And that's kind of a volume question. Do we want to see more housing projects and be more generous in our incentives for certain projects? Or do we want to play a smaller role in the development of new housing, new rental housing projects in Monroe County?
I think what I want is just to understand where we as a board are going to be. It just seems kind of, we were going one direction and then we're going another direction and we're going another direction. So I think I more so want to know how we feel as a board and how we're going to feel moving forward, not just, it kind of feels like the Wild West out there. And I describe real estate like that all the time, but you know, we were looking at affordable and low income, and then we started going to luxury. So I think we just, I like what he said, we need to set up a set of rules as to what we're going to do, and I appreciate what Norm said. You know, if we have the rules set up as to what we're going to do, then we can more so stick with them. I mean, if we're going to do luxury, I think there has to be, they have to have incentives. I don't think we can just give them, you know, I have the problem with giving them sales tax and giving them those things that just anybody's going to want to come for them. If they can get them, why wouldn't you ask for it? I mean, if it's free money, why wouldn't you ask for it? So I think that if we decide, if the board as a whole decides to move forward and to look at luxury units, I mean, I'm going to support the board in what they decide as a whole. Am I making any sense?
Yes, and I think we established luxury is pretty much off the table for COMIDA at this juncture, but, and I didn't mean, Michael could rephrase the question perhaps to help Lisa better formulate a response. If you
Sure,
want.
happy to do that. Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, it's sort of an unanswerable question, but it's on the continuum of, do we want a focused and less impactful incentive package, right, where we're gonna do fewer deals, but we're gonna know absolutely certain that those deals are something the whole board supports, right, and the community supports and everything like that, right? On the other side is, we're gonna be more aggressive. We wanna have a big impact. We wanna induce a whole bunch of deals, and we know we're gonna have a more generous abatement schedule, right, for that. So basically, it's kind of like, what's the appetite for the board to have a generous abatement schedule to do a lot of deals, or a less generous one and do fewer, more focused deals? That's the question.
Fewer, more focused.
Okay.
Is my opinion.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, and I think that's probably all the time we have if we want to go over the cost benefit, which I know the board wants to do, so.
Sure.
Is that good? Okay. So I'm gonna have to quick jump on your Zoom. Could we pass this around the board, please? Thanks. And, so give me 1 second to jump on. I'm gonna share with you, a spreadsheet that we use.
Let's give one for Norm.
An extra copy.
You want to hold on to one for Norm?
Yeah.
Yes. We'll make sure he gets it electronically and give it to him in hard copy next time.
Oh, no, we have an extra.
Oh, we already had this.
Oh, okay. It was already in the materials
Sorry.
that Robin had circulated, okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Right? We already had this. I brought this with me.
Yes, it was in the board packet
Yeah.
from whenever we approved
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
No point.
All right. So, let me try and make this as big as possible here.
This particular.
What we just wanted to show you is the tool that you guys currently use for cost benefit analysis, right?
It's different.
And I'm very partial to this tool, mostly because we created it, MRB Group did, and your subscribers to it. But there's about 42 or 43 IDAs in the state that use this, right? We try to create a uniform tool that's easy to use, that all the IDAs can get onto, so that the controller sees the same thing each time they're doing it. We were asked by the New York State EDC to put this together, right? To replace CGR from Rochester, used to have a tool that they discontinued. So we put this together. We just want to make sure that you understand when you get that piece of paper in your docket, that you understand what that piece of paper means, okay? So, I'm not gonna go through all the mechanics. You probably didn't wake up this morning saying, hey, I wanna look at spreadsheets. But, yeah, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you pushed it. I'm just having trouble closing this. Usually I can, oh, here we go. Full screen mode, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so, staff is gonna take a look at the application and they're gonna enter in a bunch of information. I'm not gonna go through every line item, right? But they're gonna enter in the estimate for in-region construction spending, right? So, whatever the developer's proposing, if they're proposing a $35, $36 million deal, only about $28 million is gonna be spent locally, right? That's the idea, labor materials. That goes in, this case is the Penn Central Apartments, which is a recent deal. And it's gonna go in the multifamily building construction industry. So all the model does is it says, okay, let's take $28 million and let's throw it into the multifamily building construction industry. What do we get? Okay? You won't see this on yours. You only see
This is the back end, this is the back end that Allison sees.
Okay?
It gets to this.
Okay. And then we have units, okay? So, we would enter in how many units of housing there are and what their targeted income threshold is, okay? That would tell us what that, how much economic activity happens there. And then finally, on the economic side, we say, okay, is there any job creation? Well, there's a little bit, there's a job and a half that's associated with those buildings, right? That's maintenance, personnel, and management, right? Put in the annual earnings, and that gets us to the economics. You'd also put into this model how many years the pilot is involved with. And I'll go through that in a second here. How much the sales tax exemption is, the mortgage reporting tax exemption. And this is a critical table here. I'm just gonna show you very quickly what this is. Property tax without the project is how much is this parcel of land gonna generate property tax if the project doesn't happen, right? So right now, this property is generating $14,000. The project doesn't happen, it's gonna grow a little bit over time, but it's gonna stay around that. The pilot is gonna go to 73 and above, right? So you're gonna get a big bump in your estimated pilot, between the pilot and the property taxes without the project. This is where you get a lot of the benefit, right? Because you're getting an increment above the no project. This is how much they would pay if the deal happens, but there is no abatement. So this is a theoretical number because of course you're not going to induce a deal that doesn't require an abatement. And so the cost of the abatement is the difference between what they would pay without an abatement and the project, which is theoretical only, and the pilot amount, okay? I want to skip over the rest of this because most of it's not applicable and also is very boring. And I'm going to go right to here, which is...
Can I just ask a question about how you determine the market value of the stabilized taxes? Like, is that prescriptive? Like, how do you determine what that first?
Yes. So what we recommend from a methodology, we allow the IDE to do whatever they feel they're comfortable. But what we recommend and what we have in our notes that is off to the side is start with your existing property tax rates for that parcel, right? Mm-hmm. Get a competent number for what the assessment would be as complete, right? Which you really kind of need to know anyhow to do your pilot, but certainly to do this, right? And then just inflate it out at 2% a year. Inflate those rates out at 2% a year, right?
The tax cap.
No. So you're basically just saying, here's where we're pegging the assessment. Let's take those current rates, put them out 2% increase per year. What do we get, right?
We base our assessment on the cost of materials. So we take the cost of materials for the most part and say that's going to be the increase in assessment.
Oh,
as
so
a
you're
result of
taking
That's the
a
increase in
very
assessment.
conservative approach
Yeah, so you
to,
don't put labor in there, we don't put all their other things in there, we kind of think materials, the cost of materials is what they
now I'm just wondering if you're artificially understating, what the true value of the, pilot would be, because the actual market value of the property, which is what the taxes will be based on, would be higher than like
It
the
could,
basis
yeah, I mean,
possible.
they're all, it's a guess on our part, yeah.
Okay,
And there's probably no pilot schedule here that matched what it actually ended up
Sure.
being, so it's
No, I
an
understand.
estimate for
okay,
this purpose.
And this is why that's why we let all the IDAs decide what their policy is. How are they gonna represent this information, right?
Sure.
We're not prescriptive in how we put the tool together.
okay,
The output is what you see, and I think it is worthwhile for us to go through this in a little bit more detail in the time allowed, right? On the first page, and you have two examples, I just wanted to give you two examples, right? On the first page, you have what we call temporary jobs. Those are the jobs that are part of the construction, okay? So I'm looking at the Penn Central Apartments project. So if you wanna look there,
Second page of what you
Got it right
have.
here.
yeah. Okay? So you can see there's,
This page
The
right
right
here.
hand page, there you go. Yeah.
Second page it is.
so if you look at 204 jobs, temporary jobs, those are the construction jobs that are happening, the construction phase jobs that are happening at the site itself. So we're basically saying, look, there's about 204 job years, technically, of jobs, and they're earning about $11 million, right? That's on-site, direct jobs, right? The indirect jobs are the jobs that result from business-to-business purchases, right? So you have a contractor on site, they have to go buy a piece of equipment to do the job, right? Well, they're buying, some of those people are buying it in Monroe County, and you get some additional jobs associated with that. A lot of the jobs are actually associated with that $11 million in direct earnings, because some of those construction workers will live locally, and some of them will spend locally, and that creates additional jobs, right? So those 40 jobs are the off-site jobs. Those are the jobs that are in the community that result from the direct job, okay? The second table is over the life of the pilot, right? Now this is a housing project. There's only 1.5 jobs, it rounds to 2, so you don't really have any indirect jobs. You have a little bit, but not very much, right? And then there's net benefits you're seeing on this one. It's, you know, there's not a lot of, you have such a big benefit. I'm gonna open up the other one actually, you can see it a little bit better, I'll do it that way. I have a second emerald point. So that if you flip to the other example, it's a little easier to see.
First page of your handout is a non-housing project, so it'll show a little better.
I think this one mislabels us as Montgomery County. Up top, says Montgomery County Industrial Development Agency.
Emerald Point, yeah. Right.
There was this is a typo.
It's an issue we were
Yeah.
having that's been remedied, right?
I just was clarifying for the record.
Okay, all right.
That's a
Yeah,
nice ride,
this is a
actually.
Monroe County project.
Right by DC.
All right, so here's a little bit easier to see. So I'm gonna look at the aggregate life of the pilot, right? That table. There's 15 jobs. You're not getting it on the screen. I'm gonna stop the share and try it again, okay? No point. Here we go. Okay. So there's 15 jobs at the site, an additional 4 in the community, total of 19. This figure 1 is just a representation, a graphical representation of the benefits, okay? The blue bars are the benefits, the orange bars are the costs. So you can see there's a cost in the construction period, that's mortgage recording tax exemption, sales tax exemption, and then there's a small and declining cost every year, which is the value of the pilot abatement, okay? The blue bar are the benefits. That's a combination of the tax revenues and the wages being paid, okay? The gray line is the net, which is the difference between the cost and the benefit. Total jobs, total earnings, is again just a graphical representation of what you already saw on the table. People like this because it's easier to read it as a bar chart. Fiscal impacts, you're gonna see a ton of numbers, okay? I want you to focus on the nominal value of that column right here, all right? So we're gonna go over costs, okay? The property tax exemption or cost, remember that's the difference between what they would pay with the project moving forward and no abatement, so that hypothetical value minus what they're paying in pilot payments, right? So the cost is $258,000. The sales tax exemption, very straightforward, is $112. Mortgage recording tax exemption is $50. So those are all the costs, and we do this because the general municipal law that governs the IDAs require us to present it in this way. We would make the argument that there is no cost to the property tax exemption because the project's not gonna happen without the exemption, right? So people misinterpret that number.
Opportunity costs.
You'll get this from the public all the time. Why are we giving away $258,000
Right,
property tax? You're not, right? This is a hypothetical number, but we have to present it this way because that's the way the GML says, right? If you move down to the benefits, you see a whole bunch of numbers. Look at the nominal values here. You can see that the preponderance of the benefit is the wages being paid, right? So of the total benefits to the region of 16 million, 15 million of that is payroll, right? Yes, you're getting some other benefits. Those are the tax benefits. You're getting property tax revenue. You're getting a little bit of sales tax revenue, not on the construction, that's on the people spending money in the community, right? And then the states get some benefits. People don't typically care what the benefits are to the state, but you know, whatever it is. And then finally, at the end, we have the big wrap table, which is what is the benefit to cost ratio, okay? Local benefits. These are benefits that come in payroll, property tax, and the local portion of the sales tax, right? Those are the benefits. 14 million. The costs, again, which are theoretical, are the property tax exemption and the local portion of the sales tax exemption and the mortgage recording tax exemption. So the ratio of 48:1 basically says for every $1 of exemption we get $48 back in benefit, right? That's what that ratio means. What I will say is this. Another very common misconception is that there is some threshold you have to hit, right, in order to induce a deal. There is no threshold. You don't even have to be at a 1-to-1 to induce a deal, right? You could be at less than 1-to-1. The intent of the law around the cost-benefit analysis is just that you're aware of what the costs and benefits are, and that you, as a board, contemplate those costs and benefits when you're making your inducement decision. And you may say as a board, we know that the ratio is low, but we need to do this deal for the community because that's our mission, and that's what the community wants, right? I think the benefit of having this is that it's less about the absolute number and more about comparing this deal to that deal, to say, hey, we've done a bunch of deals at this level, now we're getting a new deal and it's at this level, is that still a deal we want to do, right? Does it make sense for us to do it that way? So I try to be as brief as possible, and that's a lot of numbers and a lot of things, but that is what's behind the cost-benefit analysis and why we do it the way we do. Okay?
And just some context, I'm not sure when it was that general municipal law included that requirement for IDAs to do the cost-benefit analysis.
PAAA, right? I believe is what it was. Is that what it was? Prior to that?
No, it was more recent that it explicitly required the cost
Right.
benefit analysis.
Because
It's been several
COMIDA,
years, yeah.
COMIDA being among the highest volume IDAs in New York State, CGR being here locally in Rochester, we actually partnered with CGR to create the tool that they used to offer to us and then later on to other IDAs. And then that baton was, of course, as Mike mentioned, passed to MRB Group. So COMIDA, I think, has been a bit of a pioneer, at least partnering with experts like yourselves in developing and rolling out this tool. And just because other IDAs adopted CGR's model after we did, and then MRB Group built this very sophisticated model on that existing infrastructure groundwork that was laid by CGR. So just a little pointer. Yeah, right, so history.
I think most importantly, this controller has seen this report over and over and over and over again, and has never said, hey, there's something missing or there's a problem with it. Typically, what I hear from my clients that get audited is they see this is the tool, they're used to seeing it, they move on, right? And that's really where you need to be at. You don't want any flag to be raised. There are some IDAs, for whatever reason, decide to do their own, and every once in a while they'll get tagged. They'll be like, actually, you don't meet the requirements of the law, or there's a problem with it, or something like that. So we offered this at what I think is an extremely cheap price point, because we just want everybody to get past the controller. We don't want anybody to get hung up on the law, right? You know. So we see it as almost a public service.
And you guys are using the input, output, or
Yes.
the multipliers from the Bureau of Economic Analysis,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And I'm not sure if InPlan is a tool in your toolbox as well.
Very similar to that. It's not that, but it's very similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any, with all the conversations, about data and the federally collected and disseminated data being perhaps at risk currently, any conversation about those multipliers and the economic multiplier data that's crucial to this information, is that at risk of being cut?
That's a great question, and it has not come up, but
Okay.
now you have me worried.
Okay.
So thank you.
I'm just, jobs data, all of that stuff, there's, I guess, a question mark, but.
The Bureau of Economic Analysis does collect a tremendous amount of data that's quite helpful to our work, right? So one of the things you need to know, like behind the model, is they collect information on earnings per worker and sales per worker for every industry across the country, right? And that's a basis for here, so that we know when you plug in a $100 million construction project, how many jobs is that? Well, we rely on that information, right? That's how we build this, right?
Right.
And then the multipliers are about like how much of that money circulates and how much of it leaves, that kind of thing. That's also Bureau of Economic Analysis, so I hope they keep collecting it. We'll see.
Yeah.
And we are just about to launch, any day now, the next version of this model, which will help you with the Public Subsidy Board questions. It's all ready. It's basically just sitting on my desk, and I need to get it out the door. So that'll help you with another compliance-related issue. It's not really compliance for you, it's compliance for the applicant, but you need to know whether or not you trigger the 30%.
So what's gonna change?
We're gonna have a couple new tabs in here, and you're not gonna really have to do a whole lot more data entry. It's basically, we take all the same information you've already entered, and we put it into a new table that shows the value of all those benefits on a discounted cash flow basis, right? Discounted value basis. And how does that compare to the ephemerally named, the bizarrely named total construction project cost number, right? If it exceeds 30%, you need to know that, right? So it'll be like a couple extra tabs in here where you're gonna enter in a discount rate and you're gonna enter in just a couple more pieces of information. It'll do the calculation for you.
So how will it change what currently we already look at that? We have that percentage on there now.
Yeah. Well, you're one of the few IDAs that does.
Cause we have that extra page, remember we made them build that separate
Okay.
page for us?
Alright.
We got
I was trying to figure out what's changing.
What they're talking about is when you go through your application that's in your board packet, there's a printout that doesn't really look like any of
Page
these.
6 of the application.
it's embedded in the application. So once Allison puts this in, you get an additional value of incentive that not all IDAs are using, and it tells us the percentage so that we know where we are on the prevailing wage.
We asked them to, so we were ahead of the times.
Yeah.
Look at us.
Well, it was more because I was lazy and didn't wanna type things in twice, but.
Yeah.
So I will just say the difference that we will use is that we use a discount rate. So it's a net present value, and the benefit to you guys, I presented it at the Public Subsidy Board hearing a couple times. They seem to be on board with it, we'll see. It takes, if you have like a long dated pilot, it basically reduces the value of that 20th year of property tax abatement, right? It basically says, what is the value today to the applicant of that benefit 20 years in the future, right? Net present value, right? So we use a net present value calculation, which we believe the Public Subsidy Board is gonna adopt, but even if they don't, in the interim, before they said no, you can do it, right? And that's gonna help with the ratio.
So will that change our?
Well, we'll have to look and see,
We'll have
but
to
this
look
is what he
at
was
that.
talking about
Yeah.
at the EDC, the NYCDC thing, and we were.
Right, so we'll have to look at what that means for our current page.
What I hope to be is a lot of the larger pilots, the longer pilots are getting caught, right? Because the number gets big, whatever like that. It's not really fair to the applicant because that value isn't in today's dollar, that value is in some future dollar, right? So we need to have it today's dollar value, right? And I know we're just talking gobbledygook, but it really does make a difference,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
It makes a
of
big
whether the
difference.
project becomes subject to
Yeah.
prevailing wage. Does that make sense, what we're saying?
So,
This is all the nerdy stuff we said.
yeah.
So you all, do you have a program that directly pulls information from, the Bureau of Economic Analysis?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
so do you also, on the back end of this, have the ability to do, economic-based analysis and to, like, calculate, like, location quotients or anything like that?
Not in this tool,
No.
but we do that all the time. That's our bread and butter, right? Is that kind of stuff, yeah. So our data provider helps us do all of that stuff. Part of this tool has a lot, you don't see it because we don't want you to fool with it, but it has all that data in the background and a different tab that you can't access so that we can do the calculation appropriately for you in the model, right? But the stuff you're talking about is slightly different data set, so we'd have to go to the tool and actually do it ourselves. Yeah. But we do that for all of our economic strategies, for some of our housing studies and stuff like that, we put some of that in there. Yeah.
Awesome. It's been very helpful, thank you.
Pleasure to meet you guys in person. I really appreciated the vigor of the discussion today. I'm sure it's not our last discussion that's gonna be vigorous. What we hope to do from a management point of view is Tracy and I are gonna go back, we'll give you some notes off of this.
That would be helpful.
And we'll kind of summarize, here are the remaining questions. We need to do some data analysis, and we'll come back to you with that and say, okay, based on what you told us at this first meeting, and based on some initial data, here are some things to think about as a board, and some additional questions. And then we'll also do this case study research, which is here are what other regions are doing, right? And here's some additional considerations. What do you think of these things, right? We'll probably have at least a couple more meetings to talk through that. And what this will culminate in is, here are our recommendations to the board for changes to your policy documents so that you can then move forward with what you want to do, what your goals are. And then hopefully you adopt those policy changes. All right?
Do you have a time frame for when we want to have the policy in place? What's the outside date?
We'd like to be inside of a year from embarking on this process. I don't know if, Michael, you have the time frame on when we can expect to see a draft, but
Yeah.
what do you guys think might be feasible? Right.
I can't remember what we said. We'll get back to you. We have it like planned out. for you.
Okay.
It's not gonna take a year, but we need to get to you well in advance of a year because you need to have
Right.
the discussion and you need to publish it. And
Right.
you know, change your UTAP, you gotta notify folks and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've never, since I've been here, we've not updated our UTAP. I don't know how long, time intensive a process that can be, but, we'll talk about it.
A bunch of people just do it.
But I think absolutely, if not before the end of 2025, inside of 2026, certainly, but as long as it takes to do this right.
Sure. Okay.
Wonderful, thank you for
More
your time.
governance,
Thank you.
discussions.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.